Stress is a common problem for a huge portion of our population. And as a result, we needed to do more collectively to help people when they needed help. And we pooled our resources together, both academically and clinically, and came up with the programme.
Welcome to the HSE Talking Health and Wellbeing podcast. My name is Noreen Turley, and today we're exploring the Balancing Stress programme. The Balancing Stress programme is a free, flexible online resource from the HSE Health and Wellbeing and HSE psychologists that helps people understand stress, manage worry and anxiety, cope with low mood and navigate relationship pressures in everyday life. Joining me today is Dr. Niamh Clarke, Principal Psychologist Manager in Longford, Westmeath, and Niamh is also the presenter of the programme, so you're very welcome, Niamh.
Thanks, Noreen.
And we also have Dr. Michelle Howard, Clinical Design and Innovation Lead with the Spark Innovation Programme and Senior Educational and Child Psychologist. So today we're going to discuss the ideas behind the Balancing Stress programme, highlight some of the breathing, relaxation and reflection exercises available, and explain how you can start using these tools straight away in your own life. So, Niamh, firstly, going to you, can you just give us a very brief overview of the programme? Because as we talk today, we'll go through it in more detail. But why or how did this come about?
So the programme is 6 sessions, Noreen, and it came about as an initiative between the Health and Wellbeing Service within the HSE and the psychology services within the HSE that had identified that stress is a common problem for a huge portion of our population. And as a result, we needed to do more collectively to help people when they needed help. And we pooled our resources together, both academically and clinically, and came up with the programme. It's 6 sessions, and each session deals with a different matter. So the first one is understanding stress. Then we look at low mood. Then we look at anxiety. Then we look at how relationship suffers under stress, balancing it in the future. And each session has the same format. So that makes it easier for those listening to it to understand where the programme begins and ends. Now, not everybody will want to do all 6 sessions because some things will be more relevant to them than others. So, for example, if low mood was your presenting problem or where you were having difficulties, you might go to session 4 straight away. But if just you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed after Christmas, heading into the new year, and you just thought, is this stress? Am I really feeling stress or is this just something else? You might listen to session 1 and then take it from there where you might go. So as I said, it's 6 sessions. Each session has the same content format. Well, we start with a relaxation exercise. We introduce the concept for that session, then give strategies and techniques and take a real life example and then things that people can do to help themselves in that moment to deal with that problem.
Very good. So if we go back to session 1, which we know is understanding stress, we all have stress, Niamh, in our lives. But why do we experience so much stress, or why are we experiencing so much stress in our lives now?
You see, stress is a natural response. And as a result, we're never going to be able to get rid of stress because every day comes up with its new challenges. But at its basic level, stress is defined as the mental or emotional strain we experience when we meet challenging and difficult situations. And sometimes in life, we're better able to cope with those challenging and difficult situations. And at other times, it's just simply too much. For some people, it can be one stressor, one major stressor. That could be a sick loved one. It could be an unhappy child. It could be a difficult relationship or struggles at work. And others, it's small stressors, but the cumulative effect of all of them together is overwhelming. So there's no getting away from stress, unfortunately, but this programme, I suppose, leads us to being able to balance it because that's the essence. It's how to identify stress. What is it? How do we learn ways to cope better with it? And then deal with it going forward in the future so it doesn't overwhelm us. So I would say that it is a very, very significant problem for a huge portion of Irish society.
Yeah.
And we figure really badly in European statistics for stress levels. So it's not unique to one age group because sometimes in the past we associated it more with older adults. But now clearly the evidence is saying that from the age of 18 upwards, stress is a significant part of many people's lives.
Yeah. So Michelle, just bringing you in here now, you've been very involved in the programme as well. And if people do find themselves really stressed, what is the one key takeaway from session 1 that could help them reduce their stress?
Well, I think, Noreen, firstly is to understand that stress is very common, as Niamh has said, and that really it's a normal and sometimes even a helpful part of our lives. But the trick is to have that right balance so that it doesn't take over our lives. So in session 1, Niamh will help you to notice when your body is giving you clues that you're feeling stressed. And this is a really important first step to reducing stress. Sometimes our body gives us clues which we don't recognise as stress. So we're feeling really tired, have low energy, have aches or pains. So what we need to do is pay attention to our body and recognise what is happening and why it's happening. And by learning when we feel stressed, we're better armed to address it, to get ahead of it in a way. And one way people can do that, I suppose, is by doing a simple exercise like the belly breathing exercise that Niamh takes us through in session 1 when they notice these clues. And even better, if we can start to see a pattern, so I'm more likely to feel stressed when I'm doing X or when I'm at Y, then we can do the belly breathing in preparation before the clues even start. So I think really as a key takeaway message for this session, it's if listeners start to recognise stress in their bodies so that they can better take those steps to address or to balance the stress.
Yeah, that's really good. So I think it's probably worth their while just to take a listen to the belly breathing exercise now. It's just 3 minutes. So just for our listeners so that they can get ready for that and just try, and whether they're walking along and listening to this podcast or they're sitting at home, that they can just have a listen and hear the first one.
Absolutely.
I'm going to talk you through the exercise now. Place one hand on your upper chest and the other hand on your belly below the rib cage. Inhale slowly. Breathe in slowly through your nose and allow your abdomen or belly to rise. Aim to fill your lungs right from the bottom up. Hold your breath for a few seconds. Usually 2 to 3 seconds without straining. Exhale slowly through your mouth, letting your abdomen fall as you exhale. Try to exhale more slowly than you inhaled. Continue this process for 5 to 10 minutes for best results. Take note of your hand on your chest. Focus on the rise and fall of your abdomen and try to keep a slow, steady rhythm. Now let's practice this belly breathing exercise together. Again, place one hand on your upper chest and the other hand on your belly. Inhale slowly through your nose. Pause. Hold your breath. Exhale slowly through your mouth. 2, 3. Inhale slowly through your nose. Pause, holding your breath. Exhale slowly through your mouth. Inhale slowly through your nose. Pause, holding your breath. Exhale slowly through your mouth. One final time. Inhale slowly through your nose. Pause, holding your breath. And exhale slowly through your mouth.
Listen to that belly breathing exercise. You've got a really soothing, calming voice. And now we're going to go on to session 2, managing worry. And Niamh, how can people distinguish between helpful and unhelpful worries in everyday life?
Yeah, and that's a really good question, Noreen, because as Michelle had said in the previous session, certain elements of stress are actually helpful and they motivate us and they allow us to take action and respond to something in a very positive way. But the same can be said of managing worry. A small element of worry can make us more action orientated. it can make us more realistic and it can make us get things done in a reasonable time frame. And that would be seen as a helpful worry. So when a helpful worry or a thought, which is really what a worry is, motivates us to respond to a problem in the moment, like an exam, an interview, the preparation, we can actually channel the energy that comes from that worry. However, when the worry persists or it becomes more hypothetical, or you're thinking, what if? What if this happens? Could this happen in the future? Oh my goodness, this is likely to happen. And you begin to look further and further into the future without there being a real specific issue, then that is what we would class as an unhelpful worry, because it's becoming much more generalized and you're not able to channel that energy and that active thinking into a positive action. So the difference is, in plain, simple language, if it leads to a plan, it could be seen as helpful. If it is unhelpful, then there's likely to be no plan. If it's in the present, it is also likely to be seen as a helpful worry. If it's in the future, it's unhelpful, and therefore we need to address that. So the simple difference is, if it makes us and helps us act and react appropriately in the moment, that could be considered helpful. If it's something that's in the future, that is more likely to be unhelpful. And that's the one we want to take note of, because they're the ones that get us down. They're the ones that we ruminate over. We lie in bed at night thinking about.
Yeah.
And that's the one, if we can think, actually, what evidence is there for this thought?
Okay, so it's going round and round in our heads. So Michelle, what would you suggest, or what are the problem-solving tips or techniques you'd recommend for somebody who's got this persistent worry that's keeping them awake at night?
Yeah, and I suppose it's really building on what Niamh said there. It's to look at the worry and really to think, what am I thinking? Or what are my thoughts telling me? Because sometimes the worry is so persistent that we don't actually take the time to look at what we're worrying at. So once we've kind of identified the thoughts, ask yourself, are there any patterns in your thinking? Are you tending to expect the worst possible outcomes? Do you tend to see the negative side of things? Are you mind reading or predicting what other people are thinking? And is this usually negative? And Niamh talked there about challenging thoughts and looking at the evidence. And in the session, Niamh will take you through 3 questions to ask yourself, once you've identified those thoughts, is there any evidence that this is true? Is there another way to think about this? And one that can be really helpful, because we're often great at giving advice, is, what would I say to my best friend if they had this worry? Now, sometimes our worries are reasonable and rational. For example, if I keep following a poor diet and not exercising, I might get sick. But what's not helpful is to allow those worries to continue without doing anything about them. So in that case, we can learn to problem solve. So Niamh talked about having a plan. So if that's not something, I suppose, that comes to you naturally, there are skills that you can learn, and Niamh will take you through that in session 2 around problem solving. And there's really 4 key steps to problem solving. The first is to pause and think about what are the worries, make a plan, take action and review. So you just pause, take a moment to notice and name the worry thought, plan what those practical steps are that you could take to address them, follow the steps and review them. Now, a third type of worry, sometimes we're worried about something that actually is very likely to happen, but we can't control it. So, for example, if somebody close to us is very sick, this is something we are going to naturally worry about. But again, it's still not helpful to allow our worry to take over here. There may not be anything we can do to problem solve it. So for these worries, really it's most helpful to try to come to an acceptance of whatever it is we are worried about, and to seek support from people close to us to help us, I suppose, live with the thoughts and concerns while not letting them consume us.
Yeah, and it's easy to say, but sometimes it's really difficult to do. And we've all had the times at 3 o'clock in the morning or 4 o'clock in the morning, we just can't sleep due to worry, and this is constantly going around. So Niamh, what do we do in those situations?
Michelle had really lovely described there what we can do when we are faced with those worrying thoughts. And I suppose the core message from myself and Michelle today would be that identifying straight away, what is it I'm thinking about? Because as Michelle clearly said, you can sometimes be ruminating and ruminating. That's the technical term for overthinking, thinking and rethinking, and not actually getting to the nub or the hub of the problem. And identifying, name them, write them down can be very helpful. Talk to somebody. I think you'll hear Michelle and I talk about that repeatedly throughout the 6 sessions. The power of relationships, the power of sharing a problem, the power of talking to somebody, talking to a friend, a loved one. But you're right, there's not one of us, not in the room today, or not that I know anyway, that hasn't lay awake at night at some point worrying. And I suppose it's important as well that we give time to going to bed and going to sleep. And we seem to be talking about plans a lot in this session, Michelle, but having an appropriate and positive bedtime routine, which sounds very simple, but we tend to neglect often the simple things. So this is when we actually say, I'm not going to do anything, no screen time, no stressful situations, if you can avoid it before sleep, nothing that would trigger an anxious thought like looking at social media perhaps, or looking back over text messages that are worrying, or looking at the next work email, giving yourself the chance to wind down, creating that calm environment. Now that's not always possible if you have young children, or you have elderly parents, or you have loved ones that depend on you. But insofar as possible, we would say do that. Avoid the stimulants, avoid the coffee, avoid the tea, avoid all of those sorts of things, even avoiding exercise right before bedtime. And I know we lead very busy lives, so we're often trying to cram an awful lot in. But gentle activities, if you're going to do some sort of exercise, because that sometimes helps people, but that would be stretching. We would see that as stretching. And then set aside time during the day to worry. Like, this is a proven technique where you might actually sit for half an hour with your thoughts, with pen and paper, or with just the space to do that, where you identify what's causing problems, and then trying to identify potential solutions or problem solve in relation to that. But regular activity, good diet, friends, family, relationships all contribute to a good night's sleep. But if you find yourself awake at night and in the moment you can't shelve it and say, I'll deal with you tomorrow problem, I know you're there. If you can't, we would say actually get up, read a book, distract yourself, do something, because lying there is going to exhaust you and drain you. Whereas if you get up and do something and then go back to bed, you're much more likely to sleep. And if people find themselves awake one night, asleep the next night, awake again, the body can't cope without sleep, so it eventually will sleep. But people get very fearful if they're lying in bed at night, and problems seem to be much more pronounced at night. So to acknowledge them the moment they come in, I would talk to my worries and say, I know you're there. I know you're back visiting me again, and try to address it. And if I couldn't, I would distract myself by getting up, doing something boring, mundane, emptying the dishwasher, and go back to bed again.
Yeah. And Niamh, in the programme then you discuss this in more detail, and you give people the tools and talk them through the tools of what to do and the practical advice on managing their worries, so that if this arises now or in the future, they can keep going back to them.
Absolutely. And we would encourage people to go back over each session, because if you're anything like me anyway, you'll need to hear it more than once. So each time you listen to a session, you'll get something different out of it. And hopefully it will become so familiar to our listeners that when they have a worry, have a thought that they're concerned about, they know what to do in the moment. As Michelle said, it becomes second nature to do something about it.
Very good. And Michelle, just to finish up on this, on session 2, managing worry, do you have one actionable step that you could give somebody that could help break the cycle of that overthinking or worrying all the time?
I think if we were to break it down to one actionable step, it's really to encourage the listener to stop and think, catch their thoughts. I think sometimes worry can take over and people are on that train and they don't even realise that they're having so many worried thoughts. So pausing, stopping, and then listening to what is this thought? What is the thought trying to tell me? And from that, then you can follow on with the other strategies that Niamh talks you through and the problem solving plan and so forth. But it's first of all to go right back and just stop.
And acknowledge it.
Acknowledge it.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. Niamh talked about talking to our worried thoughts. But first of all, just acknowledging that I am having this thought.
Yeah.
I am having a worried thought. In the session as well, Niamh will distinguish between how thoughts are not facts.
Yes.
So separating a little bit from the worry and talking about it as, I am having a worried thought now.
Yeah.
And now let's examine it a little bit further.
And acknowledge that it's normal to have worried thoughts. It is normal. It's nothing different than anybody else is having. Yes. It's not just you. Yeah.
And Noreen, I think we probably underestimate the number of thoughts we have in a minute, never mind an hour, never mind a day. Like, you are running into the thousands of thoughts in a given day. And as a result of that, as Michelle said, your mind can race. And this is when it's slowing it down. It's in that moment, not only catching the thought, as Michelle so eloquently said, but it's catching yourself and going, hold it, pause. What am I thinking? And how can I address this? And what would help?
Yeah.
And simply telling somebody, making a decision in the middle of the night to actually talk to your sister, to talk to your mother, your brother, your loved one, or a colleague, or to write it down and start a reflective journal, or to do something that might offset the worry. If you can do that in the moment, it has significant benefits.
Yeah, I love what you said, Michelle, there about what would you say to your best friend if they were saying it. And we're all so good at giving advice to our best friends and to our family and to our neighbours and anybody who will listen to us. But it's just sometimes we just don't take that advice ourselves, do we really?
Exactly. And I think when we ask ourselves that question, it enables us to separate a little bit from the thought as well and to really challenge it. And we can be very logical when we're talking to our best friend.
Yeah.
Less so when we're dealing with our own thoughts.
Absolutely. Now in session 3, we're going to go on to talk about managing anxiety. So we've got understanding stress, we've got managing worry, and now we've got managing anxiety. How do we differentiate between anxiety and stress? And why can it be so overwhelming? I mean, stress, anxiety, I'm not sure where the line stops or crosses over, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely, Noreen. It's a really good question. I suppose anxiety and stress, they're both emotional responses, but usually we experience stress in relation to an external event or a trigger, and we refer to that often as a stressor. They're discussed a lot, maybe in session 1 of the programme. Niamh will talk about stressors such as relationships, financial worries, work, and those kind of external events. Anxiety, first of all, it's usually more long-term, and they're feelings of worry that persist even when there are no known stressors. And while stress usually reduces if the stressors are removed, anxiety is more long-term and persistent. And I suppose to answer the part of your question on why it's so overwhelming, it really is that persistence or long-term nature of anxiety that can make it so overwhelming. And often anxiety will make you either avoid certain places or experiences or cause you to engage in certain behaviours that we call safety behaviours. And so in this way, the anxiety can take over your life. It's really dictating what you do, what you don't do. It's stopping you doing things that you would like to do or might benefit from doing, or causing you to do things that you wouldn't ordinarily do.
Yeah.
So it's really persistent and pervasive, and often with no clear or known stressor or trigger.
And Niamh, when we talk about anxiety or panic attacks, what does it feel like? Because, people say, oh, I had a panic attack before I play a football game or whatever. And are we just bandying those things around, or what does it actually feel when you're really having a panic attack? How do we know when it's something really serious or whether it is a panic attack that we can take control of?
Yeah, and panic attacks are something that people are more frequently talking about. And we know from the evidence that about 10% of the population experience panic attacks.
10%?
10%
Wow.
of adult population. And panic attacks are very intense. Feelings of fear and anxiety. They're not dangerous, but they're extremely unpleasant and they're extremely upsetting for the person experiencing them. And you often hear even young people, and you mentioned there about games. I, like Michelle, am heavily involved in the GAA, and you would often see those before a match, particularly in very stressful situations. It might be a county match, it might be a local derby where there's a huge expectation on the person and on themselves. That panic then begins to rise in the person. Sometimes there's no obvious trigger. That can be more worrying for people when there's no obvious sign and they experience a panic attack. And really, panic attacks are over breathing. And while they are not dangerous, they're extremely unpleasant. And it is hyperventilating. So it is, as it says on the tin, it's over breathing. We breathe too quickly, we breathe too much. And there's actually a very scientific science behind this, which is basically there's an imbalance then between the oxygen and carbon dioxide that we're breathing in and out. And that's what actually causes the panic attack. And for some people, just knowing that that's what it is and that it will pass and that it won't do you any long-term harm is enough. Because people in the moment think, am I having a heart attack?
Yeah.
Am I going mad? Is this going to happen when I don't want it to happen? When I'm meeting my new partner, when I'm going out to dinner with my friend? I don't want to be in an embarrassing situation where I think I'm going to not be able to breathe. But there are many strategies, and we go through one in great detail in order to help with over-breathing and hyperventilating, which is the box breathing. But knowing that hyperventilation is common, that this is something, panic attacks that many, many people experience, is helpful to know. It will pass, and that it can be precipitated by an obvious stressor or it could come out of the blue. And sometimes people experience panic attacks in the middle of the night, and they're often the most frightening because you're fast asleep and suddenly you wake up in a fit of over-breathing and in panic. And you think, what happened there?
Okay, so it could just come on somebody. So is it like managing the worry? You acknowledge the panic attack and you know it's happening and you recognise it and you recognise it will pass.
Yes, and then you've got to actually modify your breathing. That's the crucial piece. And you mentioned in the beginning there about movies, you will have seen people breathing into a paper bag. And there's a science behind that, because if you're breathing in and you're pausing and allowing the carbon dioxide back in, it slows down the breathing. And that's why people say breathe into a bag. But it's not always possible to have a paper bag with you. So literally taking a moment, breathing into your hands, cupping your hands and breathing into them and counting your breaths will slow down your breathing and will help balance that hyperventilation that's happening.
Okay. Michelle, what practical strategies do you advise for facing fears and reducing anxiety on a day-to-day basis?
I think it can be helpful if we think about this in terms of what we can change across the 3 areas. And we talk about this a lot in the programme, about how our body feels, about our thoughts and about our behaviour. So first of all, it's important to notice how our body feels. So often the first place that we notice anxiety, heart racing, breathing fast. And when we notice that, when our body gives us those first clues, it can be very helpful to listen to the box breathing, to follow the box breathing exercise, or any of the relaxation exercises throughout the programme that people find helpful, because that's quite personal. It's worth listening to them, trying them out and finding the one that works for you. Secondly, then, it's to look at the thoughts. So as we said earlier, it's to stop and name your thoughts and then use those strategies around challenging your thoughts, looking for the evidence. What would I say to my best friend? So now we have calmed our body, we've caught our thoughts and we have challenged them. And the next thing to look at then is, how can we change our behaviour? So for example, sometimes if we're afraid of something, if we have fears, we respond by avoiding them. Most of us might try to avoid either the people, the places, the situations that cause us anxiety. And while this will bring us temporary relief, it increases the symptoms of the anxiety in the long term, and really it feeds into the anxiety and keeps it alive. So for example, if you had anxiety about driving on a motorway or going in a lift, you choose to avoid the situations and it gives you immediate relief. You know, thank God I don't have to go in that lift. But maybe then in the long term, it stops you staying in a hotel where you might have to stay on the 18th floor.
Yeah, so it restricts you.
Yeah, it restricts you. So really, in session 3, we learn about how do we face our fears by breaking the action into steps. So for example, you're afraid to drive on the motorway. So you might break this down into driving on a dual carriageway, slightly quieter road, driving on the motorway at a particularly quiet time of the day, and then moving to driving on the motorway at a busy time. And you start with the easiest steps and you repeat until you're comfortable with it, and then you move on to the next step until eventually you're actually facing your fear head on, doing that very behaviour that you once avoided. That's it in a nutshell. It's trying to address those 3 areas: how your body is feeling, what you're thinking, and what you're doing.
Michelle, that's a really good summary of what we've already been discussing, and the first 3 sessions. I think we've covered a lot in the first 3 sessions of Balancing Stress. And Niamh, we wanted to talk there a little bit about CBT and positive psychology as well, because the programme is really based around both of those things, aren't they?
Yeah, and it was very important for the Health and Wellbeing Department and the psychologists, the heads of Psychology Services Ireland, to have proven, known, effective strategies in a programme. When we look at stress, what we know works is a method called cognitive behavioural therapy. And people are familiar with the word CBT. They might not know that it stands for cognitive behavioural therapy. And this is an approach which is very effective in managing stress. And we have incorporated CBT and positive psychology into each of the 6 sessions, but particularly into sessions 1 and 4 for CBT, and positive psychology particularly into 1, 5 and 6. So CBT helps us identify, as Michelle so well described, our thoughts and how our thoughts impact on our feelings, and how our feelings and thoughts impact on our behaviours. It is proven to work effectively with a lot of emotional and mental health presentations, and particularly for stress, anxiety and low mood. Positive psychology then, on the other hand, is a much newer branch of psychology, And in this, we look at the scientific studying of flourishing. And this can be flourishing of an individual or of a community, of a country, and what makes someone thrive. And examples of positive psychology that we do discuss in each session, but particularly, as I say, in 1, 5 and 6, are things like practicing savouring, kindness, gratitude, looking at your personal strengths. And all of these are proven evidence-based strategies that help manage stress. So the whole programme is built on CBT and positive psychology because they're proven to work.
Great. And Niamh, we'll go into those in a little bit more detail in the next episode. So for today, we'll say if anybody's feeling anxious or stressed in any way, please go to our Balancing Stress programme on hse.ie. So if you've heard anything that has resonated with you today, you can explore this free Balancing Stress programme online. What we're saying is you don't have to do all 6 sessions or follow them in order. You can simply choose the video and exercises that match how you're feeling right now and work through them at your own pace and in your own way. You may want to do session 1 first and then follow on with whatever resonates with you. But we just encourage people to go to balancingstress.ie. Thank you for listening to this episode of HSE Talking Health and Wellbeing. Today we've looked at stress, worry and anxiety and some simple ways to understand what's going on in your body, mind and to take small steps to feel a bit safer and calmer today. Thank you for listening.